Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have online with us Curtis Ellis. He's a political communications consultant and writer for WND.com. He also formerly was a writer and producer for Lou Dobbs Tonight, CNN, NBC News, CBS News, Fox News, a reporter for Associated Press Radio, and a freelance writer. He has also hosted a nationally syndicated talk radio show. His commentary appears regularly on TV, radio, online, and in print. And finally, he's the executive director of the American Jobs Alliance. Mr. Ellis, thank you for joining us on the Joe Miller Show.
Great pleasure to be here, Joe. Nice talking with you.
So you recently wrote an article about how the TPP has hit a roadblock. Before we get to that, though, we've talked quite a bit on this program about the TPA that regrettably passed out, and of course, president since signed. We opposed the TPA. We thought it was giving the president too much authority. It would fast-track international agreements that harmed the country. One of the things that really disappointed me in the run-up to the TPA vote is that Senator Ted Cruz, who I support largely, was a supporter of TPA, and then on the night before the vote, switched his vote. Do you have any inside baseball on what happened there, and also why he may have supported the TPA and what changed his mind?
Well, you know, I do hate to speculate about what goes on within politicians' minds or candidates' minds, and I know it sounds like a bit of an insult to call Ted Cruz a politician, but when somebody's running for office like he is and asking all kinds of people for money, you just got to think that some of the people that he was hitting on for campaign donations, like maybe some of the folks his wife used to work with over at Goldman Sachs, influenced his position. I mean, he did come out early and strong for this fast track. Now, I met Ted Cruz at the South Carolina Tea Party convention in January, back in January of this year, and I had a private audience with him. And I said, Senator, a lot of people are concerned about this fast track business, and you know, we don't trust this guy to negotiate a deal with Iran. We don't trust him to negotiate Bergdahl's release. Why on earth would Congress surrender its authority to amend and oversee these negotiations this agreement that he's going to negotiate? And the senator came back with, I believe in free trade. Free trade's good for workers and good for businesses and good for everybody. And I said, Senator, with all due respect, you can be for free trade, but be against giving Obama more power since we can't trust him to negotiate. And he just then changed the subject, and he just would not hear of it. And I was a little, let's say, disappointed.
Yeah, he eventually came around. I mean, he announced the night before the vote, and of course, my disappointment was that the votes were counted at that point, so his opposition really did nothing to stop it.
He gave a lot of people cover to come out for that in the House. You know, there are a lot of people in the House of Representatives that we only needed to change a handful of votes to kill this thing. He gave them cover. There is no question about that, Joe. And I'd heard from very reliable sources that he was getting the living daylights beat out of him on the campaign trail. I know the calls were coming because I've got good relationships with Tea Party folks in Texas. The calls were coming into his office 100-1 against this, and on the campaign trail, he could not get anybody to sign up to volunteer for his campaign because they were all saying, "What are you doing with this fast track TPA business?"
But, on the broader free trade issue, and we'll get to TPP here in just a second, but,
sure.
I've got an economics degree. I've, of course, been indoctrinated in the conservative economic view that free trade at any cost is what we always ought to pursue. And, about a little over a decade ago, I started thinking, wait a second now. I absolutely understand the idea that the more efficient producer, if we ensure that we aren't protectionist in that industry, it will actually ensure that we have more material wealth because we produce what we're most efficient at. We allow other countries to produce what they're most efficient at. Everybody wins. The problem is that we have essential industries that we've now basically punted to our enemies. For example, if we're involved in some sort of international conflict in the future, let's say China, and they have the corner market on rare earths and metals, and they construct certain circuit boards that are integral to weapons platforms. we're basically going to be leveraged in such a circumstance because of this blind free trade. So my view has evolved on this in the sense that this country has to ensure that it can produce what's necessary for its essential services, obviously, for its defense. And yet most of these agreements are completely blind to that. And I believe the reason why is because the ultimate end is internationalism. Would you agree with that?
That's right. I would agree with that 100%, Joe. You hit the nail on the head. Even classic free trade theory, going back to Adam Smith, says you have to protect essential industries. You can't, and the reason these agreements aren't is exactly what you said. Their goal is a world without borders, is a internationalism, globalism, call it what you will, where people, goods, and money flow freely around the world. There are no nations, practically speaking. Gone, done, over. But you're right, essential industries, defense industries, gone. The Pentagon is freaking out that they can't rely. The manufacturing base in this country is so rotted away, we can't produce the goods we need. And look at one of your big industries up there in Alaska, fishing. That is a protected industry. If a Russian trawler or a Japanese trawler tries to fish the waters off of Alaska, they're gonna run into the Coast Guard real fast.
You start to think that they're protected, but actually the crony capitalism leaks into there too, and you end up with a lot of foreign interest.
And that's the other part of these so-called free trade agreements. It's crony capitalism. It's really, if you go back to classic trade theory, this is mercantilist thinking. They're trying to push the profits of exporters. That's the goal of these. They pick some winning industries, and we're going to help them export, and we don't care what happens to the rest of the citizens of this country. It's all about maximizing exports for the well-connected crony industries.
That's exactly right, and that's why they want to. I mean, the TPP, and let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, this is basically multinational corporations in charge of the process. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
And give us a little bit of
in charge of the outcome.
Give us a little bit of a historical background before we get into, and we'll probably touch the next segment on the problem, the roadblock that TPP has hit. But give us a little bit of background on what started TPP, how it's progressed or digressed, and where we're at today.
Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership actually started as among a few countries, New Zealand and a few countries in Southeast Asia, in that corner of the world. Then when President Obama came in, he jumped on and said, we're going to now turn this into this pan-Pacific whoop-de-doo and bring in, we're going to jump into it. And then they brought in Mexico and Canada so we could write NAFTA Chapter 2. And then they brought in, you got some folks down in South America, Chile and Peru, and then they brought in Japan to make this thing worthwhile. Otherwise, it made no sense. You've got so the major economies involved here. You've got Australia and New Zealand, but Japan is the big dog. And then the other interesting factors in here are Vietnam and Malaysia and Brunei. Brunei is this tiny Islamic sultanate ruled by Sharia law. The Sultan of Brunei is probably one of our friends in that he provides cover and money for some of our black bag operations around the world, but they don't really do much there except persecute Christians, arrest anybody who has a Bible, and threaten to throw into prison anybody who celebrates Christmas. But other than that, there's 650,000 people in the country, ruled by Sharia law. But so why do we even care about a trade agreement with these people? They export oil, and that's it. So Vietnam is a communist dictatorship, and they are looking to become a major exporter to the U.S. of more Nike sneakers. And Malaysia is the most problematic of the bunch. It's a Muslim country that, again, persecutes Christians and non-Muslims. They force people to convert to Islam, and it's one of the worst slave states on the face of the earth. The State Department had put it in the lowest category of human trafficking. Basically, people are sold into slavery there, and those slaves work on plantations that produce goods that end up in our food, on our store shelves, and they work in electronic factories that those products end up on our shelves too. So we have this very interesting spectacle of the first African American president pushing trade with a slave state.
It was, I think, reported yesterday or the day before that the president actually, or his administration, pushed the State Department to basically lie about the position of 14 of those countries. And Malaysia, I think, was one that ended up not getting as bad a black eye in that report of human trafficking. It's weird if you looked at that, and we're coming up on a break, that most of the nations that the Obama administration inflated or deflated their abusiveness were Muslim or communist. Now, there are a few exceptions to that. I think Mexico is in there and India as well. But that just kind of reflects the whole direction of this administration. We have Curtis Ellis on with us. We're talking about the TPP, TPA, international trade agreements. We'll talk about how TPP hit a roadblock after these messages. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have Curtis Ellis with us. He's a political communication consultant and writer for WND.com. He also has been a writer, producer for Lou Dobbs Tonight, CNN, NBC News, CBS News, Fox News, and a reporter for AP Radio. He's a freelance writer, hosted a nationally syndicated talk radio show, and his commentary appears regularly on TV, radio, online, and in print. He's the executive director of American Jobs Alliance, and he's hot on the issue of international treaties, TPP, TPA, letting people know what's going on with it. A recent story, WorldNet Daily, is about how the TPP has hit a roadblock right now. We're getting into some of the background about the TPP, why the fact that that treaty has hit, or that proposed treaty has hit a roadblock is a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for staying with us, being willing to impart more knowledge on this issue to our listeners here in Alaska.
Well, it's a good thing you're spreading the word there, Joe. People need to know about this.
Well, on that note, the TPP, this is something that a lot of people haven't known about until recently because this was a treaty that was pretty much negotiated in secret. My understanding is we talked a little bit about last segment how Obama really gave this thing legs, but it started clear back, I think, in the Clinton administration, didn't it?
Look, these things have been murking around for a long time. You in the Clinton administration, they wanted to push something called the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which would include some of the countries now in TPP, Chile and Peru. They wanted to create a free trade zone from, the entire Western Hemisphere. Now they've set their sights on spanning the Pacific and bringing in everybody along the Pacific Rim. So you go back to 1967, and you've got George Ball, former Undersecretary of State for Kennedy and Johnson, testifying before a joint economic committee, saying we have to erode national sovereignty. We have to diminish the power of national governments so they don't interfere with the multinational corporations' ability to do business when they want, where they want, however they want. I mean, it's in the congressional record. It's all there. It's the same goal, and
it's pretty basic. I mean, a border and a different legal regime, which nations have, that creates problems for business. I mean, they've got to hire a different team of lawyers. They've got different standards that apply. So they want to tear all that down. They want to have that. They want to have an international regime that they have constancy, they have predictability in, and that's what's so terrifying about this TPP. It's not that it's making things good for business, but it's actually taking business out of the legal regime or the jurisdiction of countries. And my understanding of it is, ultimately, if this thing passes, multinational corporations could come into the United States, set up shop, and technically not be subject to American law. Is that right?
They would. That's right. They would, if they didn't like our laws, they'd be able to challenge our laws, but not in U.S. courts, not in federal courts or state courts. They'd go to this international court set up under the TPP, and it's a court with unelected judges, with arbitrators who basically are lawyers who work for the corporations that get to decide. We've got a prime example of that right now with this country of origin labeling on our meat. If you want to know if that the steak you're buying in the store came from the United States or did it come from Mexico or Canada, the World Trade Organization says you're not allowed to do that. and we're being told we have to repeal the law that says you have to put a label on the hamburger meat and tells the customer where it came from. It's that kind of deal.
Lord.
International court says, no, your laws are an interference. They're interfering with trade. They're a barrier. They're interfering with some companies' ability to make profits. So you just got to get rid of that law. And it wasn't a U.S. court that made that decision. It's one of these international trade tribunals.
Well, let's hear the good news. Let's hear the good news. TPP hitting a roadblock. We got about 6 minutes left in the segment. Tell us what's going on and why this has happened.
Well, after Congress surrendered its ability to amend whatever agreement this guy comes up with and these cronies come up with, all of the trade ministers, the Obama administration and the 11 other countries met in Hawaii last week, and everybody had high hopes that now that Congress is out of the way and elected representatives aren't going to get in the mix here, we're going to be able to make an agreement, right? Right, yeah. But they didn't, because what happened is these other countries, they did not want to give up their sovereignty. They did not want to give up their ability to look out for their citizens. You had the Mexican trade representative at the news conference afterwards when they announced they did not reach an agreement. He said, I'm going to stand up for what's good for my country. We happen to have an auto industry in Mexico because of NAFTA, right? The United States gave up its auto industry. It all moved to Mexico, and now Mexico does not want to see that auto industry move to Vietnam under a Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the sugar growers in Mexico get to sell a certain amount of sugar to the United States. Australia would like to sell more sugar to the United States under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That means Mexico would sell less sugar. And they said, no way, Jose, we're not going to let that happen. So they threw a monkey wrench into the works. Now, and interestingly enough, Canada, they happen to have, and Japan, both have small family dairy farms. You got small farmers that are producing fresh milk, and they've got a dairy herd in both countries. Not industrial scale dairy agriculture, small scale family farms, the way it used to be in the United States, say 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? Now, the United States and New Zealand want to export more industrial quality milk, right, from our industrial farms. New Zealand, unbelievably, wants to become the world's big exporter. But Canada, we're not going to let you guys, Fonterra Corporation, sell milk in our country and put our dairy farmers out of business. So nobody could agree on these things. It's this old-fashioned, who's looking out for me? Who's looking out for the citizens of their countries?
And it's so multifaceted. I mean, you've just mentioned, the half a dozen industries or so. I mean, is there any way out of this? Is it just broken down to a point that it's not going to go forward? What's your prediction?
Let us pray. Let us pray. They're supposed to meet. Well, they didn't set a time to meet again, but our ambassador, our trade negotiator, Michael Froman, is going over to Southeast Asia at the end of the month. If they don't, the reality is we're now getting into presidential campaign season, and the last time you had one of these trade deals come up during a presidential campaign, it was Ross Perot and the giant sucking sound and George Bush and Bill Clinton, and it was not a pretty picture, and nobody wants to go through that again. Now, the reality is it's going to take 4.5 months from the day President Obama says, I intend to sign this TPP agreement. So if they came up with an agreement tomorrow and the president the next day said, I intend to sign this agreement, it would be 4.5 months before it came before Congress. That would be January of 2016. So every day, every week that goes by without an agreement, we get deeper and deeper into the presidential campaign season. And I'll tell you what, you got Donald Trump out there saying these deals stink and we can't negotiate them and I'm against it, and the pressure will be on Ted Cruz and it will be on Rand Paul and it will be on Carly Fiorina. Now, a lot of these candidates, not Ted, but a lot of the candidates came out strong against TPA. And when we start to see what's in this TPP, I don't think they're going to be too thrilled with that either. So,
do you know where Scott Walker is on? I would assume he's against the international trade agreements, or do you know?
No, he's for it. This guy's doubled down. He's all for it. Yeah,
interesting.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Who are some of the other major proponents of the international trade agreements on the Republican side?
Mark Rubio and Jeb Bush. They are the big ones. They're about the only ones. Christie. See, now they all weighed in on TPA. Most of them came out against fast track, except for Rubio, Jeb Bush, and for a while there, Ted Cruz, and Scott Walker. They were all for it, and it was just unbelievable. When he was pressed on it, Walker doubled down and was adamantly in favor of it. Now, they've all kept their options open on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but because Rand Paul was against TPA on the transparency issues, on the fact that we're being asked to fast-track something that's secret, that we can't read, that the American people can't see. So, we don't know which way he's going to go. But I think that the pressure would be incredible for someone to come out for this thing.
Well, Curtis Ellis, I appreciate you coming online with us to talk about the TPA, the TPP. Thanks for giving us the good news on the blockage. It's a sacred point of conservative thought. Free trade at all costs, that's what it used to be. And so we're kind of up against that when we're talking about these candidates that have kind of grown up in that environment. We've got some education to do on our leadership, but the people obviously don't want to sell our sovereignty down the drain. Appreciate your efforts to activate the people to make sure that this stuff doesn't go forward. Thanks again for being on the Joe Miller Show.
Sure. Everybody go to obamatrade.com, send a message to Congress. Tell them no.
obamatrade.com. Thank you, Curtis. Appreciate it. Stay with us. Rachel Alexander next.